Hello, everybody. My name is Rahul Tandon, and I work for the BBC. I have just a few hours ago come off Radio 4 and the BBC World Service, where we have been having a discussion program, Business Matters, and we're going to have lots of discussion now about the issue of engaged research. I've been speaking to some of the panelists before we've been on air. It has been a lively and it's been an entertaining conversation about some of the challenges in terms of moving forward with engaged research. So without further ado, less of me, more of them. We have 4 panelists, and I'm going to go firstly to Lola, who's going to introduce herself and her work. And all 4 of them are going to whiz around, tell you a little bit about themselves, a little bit about their thoughts on engaged research, and then we're going to move into a discussion. Remember, you can also ask questions to the Q&A on the right-hand side of your screen. Don't be shy. Get those questions coming in. But Lola, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Rahul, and greetings to everybody. It's great to be here to talk to you about our projects, the Recirculate Project, and to share more thoughts about engaged research. I'll just give a few minutes introduction on the Recirculate Project. The Recirculate Project is a 7 million project funded by UK Research and Innovation through the Global Challenges Research Fund. It is one of the projects funded under a call entitled Growing Research Capability to meet the challenges faced by developing countries. And in alignment with the call, the Recirculate Project is specifically focused on addressing the development challenge facing Africa around water. An African Union AU report in 2014 revealed that 50% of Africans live in areas without adequate water. 96% of African agriculture is dependent upon rainfall. Given this sort of statistics, the Recirculate Project has been designed around driving innovation in Africa through capacity building for a safe circular water economy. And the vision of the Recirculate Project is to support new partnership-based approaches that can enable African researchers to grow transformational impact through working with, in, and for their communities. So in summary, the objectives of Recirculate is to focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs 6, 8, and 13, which some of you may be familiar with already. SDG 6 goal is around ensuring access to water and sanitation for all. SDG goal 8 is around promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. And SDG 13 is around taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So Recirculate is led by Lancaster University, and we have partners in various countries such as Ghana, Nigeria, Malawi, Zambia, Botswana, and Kenya. I am a co-investigator on the Recirculate project. I'm representing the first work package, entrepreneurship and innovation. I co-lead the deliverables, including engagement activities and the research outputs. Apart from that, my major role is as a professor of entrepreneurship at Lancaster University Management School in the UK. And it's a delight to be here to speak to you about our engaged research on the Recirculate project. I will now hand over to my colleague, Priscilla, who is also involved in the Recirculate project, to give you a view and to introduce herself and give you a view of the African context. Over to you, Priscilla.
Lola for that. Thank you, Lola, for that wonderful introduction. And as Lola said, I'm a researcher on the Recirculate project. I'm based in Lancaster University, Ghana, West Africa. So most of the experience I'll share with you will be based on the developing country context. So what we do here in terms of engagement is to integrate high quality research with capacity building activities. So we have a whole range of networks that we rely on to do that, and we partner with to do that. So we have community users, for example. So it's not out of place to see an opinion leader in one of our labs observing how fecal matter contaminates their water bodies in Africa. And then we also have other actors in the ecosystem. Basically, Recirculate is a challenge-led research. So we rely on all the actors that we need to drive a change and to solve that problem. Okay, so another actor that we usually engage with are policy makers. And then we liaise with them to ensure that we move, we make more impact. But thirdly, we also have our communication partners that we do engage with. So for example, CNBC Africa and Forbes are key media partners on the project. And then it's made up of different disciplines. So I normally work with other disciplines in the sciences. So we have individuals working on water and pathogens. We have those who are looking at how water can be used sustainably to support agric in various African countries, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Botswana, in Kenya, and so forth. And we also do have other individual practitioners and entrepreneurs that we work with. So in summary, what we try to do is to co-create and co-develop sustainable solutions to the water challenges in Africa. I'm sure that you get to know more about what we do and then how we do these things in the course of the discussion. So I think I'll just hand over to Richard to continue on the discussion.
Thanks, Priscilla. Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Owen. I'm at the University of Bristol, where I'm a professor of innovation management. It's a really interesting time to be having this discussion about engaged research. I was just kind of reflecting on the fact that as management scholars or people that sort of within this field, we're getting increasingly drawn in to various forms, either proactively or kind of falling into various forms of engaged research. And I wonder how many of you sort of coming into this session today are either involved in some sort of interdisciplinary project with a computer scientist or some external partner, or are being asked to be involved in that or thinking of being involved in that. And I think that's a sign of things to come. I think that's going to be happening more often, because increasingly research is being framed around missions, societal challenges, sort of strategic kind of mode to research, innovation, that kind of stuff. And increasingly around issues relevant to external partners. And we're seeing some big policy drivers. So for example, in Europe, I'm involved in a project around open science, which has got collaboration and engagement at its very core. But then we've got other narratives like trusted research, which is also about engagement, but on very particular terms. It has a very geopolitical idea about who we jump into bed with when we're doing kind of engagement. But I guess the main point is that this idea of engaged research has got huge resonance at the moment, and is going to become increasingly part of our world as management scholars. And what I'm interested in talking about with the panel today, and with you guys sort of more generally, if you want to get involved in it, is what are the kind of terms of engagement that we're getting involved with? How are we getting involved in these interdisciplinary engaged research projects, and for what purposes? And how do we feel about that? You know, how do we feel about our role, and what agency do we have? So I'm keen to explore that. I have a kind of history of working in engaged research. I developed a framework for responsible innovation funded by ESRC and EPSRC, God, so far ago, I can't even remember, which has engagement at its very core. I'm also involved in various forms of projects, for example, a co-production project for gene drive development in Mali. So I've had practical experience. I also took some time out of academia to work in government, and learned a lot about engagement there. So coming back into academia, you know, whatever it was 10 years ago, it was really nice to sort of be able to bring that back in. But now I think is a time for us to reflect on where engaged research is going, whether we have space and time for it, or resources for it, and on what terms. And hopefully we'll be able to have a discussion about that over the next hour or so. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I think I'm next up on the list of speakers at the moment. So I'm Melanie Netsch, and I'm Deputy Director of Innovation and Impact at the Economic and Social Research Council, which is part of UK Research and Innovation. Lots of acronyms in the morning there. I thought with this introduction, I'd give a bit of an overview and follow on from what Richard just said, talking about the overall direction of the travel of funding around larger mission focus, and gives a few reflections from my role in being part of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund about the opportunities really for management and business studies that this can provide. And quite keen in this session to hear about your reflections and experiences and thoughts on some of the big areas that we're touching on. So yes, absolutely agree, Richard. The direction of travel, although within ESRC, we'll still have our standard calls and there's still the sort of business as usual. But what we're seeing is a move to a lot larger mission impact solutions focus, whichever word you'd like to have, focusing on kind of sectors or a wicked problem, net zero, leveling up are all examples within that, or in the case of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, some sector-led challenges. And ESRC's recent priorities fund call on productivity. I think it's a great time for the panel to be having this discussion about engaged research. The government's produced its innovation strategy, its people, culture, and talent strategy as well. And of course, we're in the middle of a spending review process. So thinking about where is the funding and where are the opportunities coming next. So I think that's fantastic timing actually within this space. So my reflections, having worked in this area for quite a while, is it's really clear that no single discipline has the answer to any of these challenges. The need is absolutely interdisciplinary. We need to bring new networks together across the humanities and social sciences, but also across STEM. And we have examples where in our Next Gen Services project where they brought that computer science, design researchers, social sciences together, working with businesses to help them think about business models and how to think about technologies and new ways of working. But we also have to be multi-sectoral. We need to be thinking around government, charities, business, researchers, and multi-country. And I think the Recirculate project has given a great example around both working across the countries to solve and share insights and skills and knowledge and approaches, but also about the different sectors that need to be worked with to solve these problems. I really am very passionate about what social sciences can bring in this space. And I think social science really helps us understand the context and the reasons for where we are behind the challenges, question assumptions. But I think where our challenge sits is also the need to be part of the solution and working towards the answers and understanding why they work and how transferable they are. I also think social sciences can be a great convener, creating neutral spaces for people, bringing in new voices or new disciplines and perspectives. For example, the Digital Security by Design Describe Hub that we funded is really starting to bring new voices in to solve the challenges around digital security and digital security by design within that, bringing in new discipline voices who never thought that they would be able to or had something to add in that space. So I think this brings a great opportunity for management and business studies. And it's because we know there's evidence around reports that the departments are highly interdisciplinary and they have high connections with different sectors. So it really puts this area in a great place to be leading on some of these challenges, and also core and integral to the partnerships. I think one of the challenges that we have around social sciences often is seeing the value proposition. Actually, where do we add value, and how can we bring a new lens to a solution, and the partnerships, and also how can we bring in the opportunities to bring in new research questions into these areas. So new partners can bring in new methods and new approaches, and how do we continue to develop the evidence base and start sharing across that? And that's one of the great opportunities, I think, of these larger scale challenges that we have. We've been working, and I've been working with the Chartered Association of Business Schools and the British Academy of Management to really start to understand the opportunities and the barriers in this area, particularly for management and business studies, and from my lens, the social sciences. We're trying to build in examples of practice as innovations that have happened and impact, but also help us understand as a funder, how can we be an enabler, or where might we be causing unintended negative consequences to partnerships buildings. So I'll end there with just hopefully that as an opportunity moment, and I'll pass back to Rahul so we can perhaps kick off the discussion.
Well, I think you can see from the 4 panelists that we have that very engaged on the issue of engaged research. We already have a number of questions that have been coming in, so we are going to go to those very, very shortly. But if I could just go to you, Richard, because you raised many interesting points. And I suppose what I want to ask you is, what is the one challenge at the moment that you think is the greatest challenge when we're talking about engaged research?
Well, first of all, I got to just say, Rahul, there's lots of benefits of engaged research before we kind of get into the challenges. Yeah. And I live by that.
Well, go on. What are well, for you, those benefits?
The one major challenge that I would say that perhaps colleagues will recognise is just the one of time. This is a particular moment now where management scholars and researchers more generally are just incredibly squeezed for time. The priority is in the teaching quite often, and for us, just having that time and space to meaningfully engage and to have the space to understand how to engage and on what terms in engaged research is really, really difficult at the moment. My hope is that will change, but it's a significant issue for us as a discipline, I think.
Well, on that point, Lola, can I come to you here? Because Professor Katie Mason has sent a question in to you saying, Lola, you're a professor at Lancaster University. That is a busy life. How do you manage travel and achieve engagement with those African countries involved in the project? How do you do this work in practice in your everyday life? And what part of this work is most difficult to juggle with your other responsibilities? So really picking up, I suppose, there on the point that Richard made.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Katie, as well. I will just start off with the point Richard was making about the challenges. So before the pandemic, engagement on the Recirculate project focused on capacity building via two means, workshops and residencies. Workshops, we were having like 10 workshops at different periods in 5 African countries. For example, in the first 6 months of the project, workshops were held at Lancaster University, Ghana. In terms of the residencies, participants on the Recirculate project, we were offering residencies at Lancaster University. Up to 12 applicants per workshop are selected and offered a place on the residencies. Given the pandemic now, all this has changed, and most of our engagements has been virtual, as which most other aspects of work. So even though it has been virtual, it has been very busy. On the Recirculate project, where it's an interdisciplinary groups, diverse interdisciplinary groups that we work with, suggesting there tend to be lots of meetings, diverse aspects of management. But as Richard rightly said, it's about time, managing time. We as researchers, it's not, the Recirculate project is not the only research I'm involved in terms of research projects. And I have other aspects of life to deal with in terms of my work, teaching, service. So
how do you solve those different ones? Do you sit down and say, I'm going to spend so much time on this one, so much time on this one? Because that's not really the way life works sometimes, is it?
No, it doesn't work that way. I suppose there are time frames when things are busier than others on the Recirculate project. Over the summer, for example, we know the time has got to be devoted to working on research papers based on data that we've collected in the previous months. During term times when we are teaching, we know there are some activities that we may be planning for. It may be annual meetings. So it's just as thing comes, we've got to deal with it while balancing juggling other aspects as well.
Can I go to Priscilla here, just to get your perspective on the challenges we heard there from Lola about how some of that engaged research has had to change during the pandemic. How has that been for you, Priscilla, in terms of the work that you're doing?
It's been challenging. As Lola said, we moved everything online, but I would like to speak a bit about the challenge that we used to face prior to the pandemic. You know that the more you involve various partners, the more you need to coordinate, because it's a very, very big project. Okay, we work with NGOs, we work with other institutions. So sometimes what we tend to do is to take a step back and allow the local institutions and those that are capable of doing engaged research to do what they can do. Okay, otherwise it means that you have to do everything, which is virtually impossible. For example, our local partners at the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research in Ghana, CSR, does a lot of engaged coordination in terms of bringing together NGOs, bringing together local communities, bringing together all those that we need to drive change in the water economy. So I think that's really worked for us in the past.
I want to go to another question that we have here because they keep coming in. And remember, you can keep sending those questions to us, the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen to help us try and frame the debate that we're taking place. Melanie, can I come to you on this one? But this is from Marion Izzet White, and she says leadership research appears to be invisible in the SDGs, but should clearly be in there somewhere. What advice can the panelists offer leadership researchers to connect their work to more engaged research?
Oh, well, that's such an interesting question. And I guess I see leadership in two ways, actually. I think there's leadership from the social scientists leading and helping to see themselves as solving the problem. And then there's the how do you support, how do you have the evidence from what leadership research brings across, and how do you share that knowledge? And I guess it's far more about how do you build that factor in. We've been building that very much into the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund programs that we have when ESRC is involved in them, and trying to build that lens of how do you support the knowledge that management and business studies particularly can bring in this field to businesses particularly, and helping them to think about their skill up. So I guess from my point of view, the earlier you're engaging to understand what the problems and the opportunities are, the more likely you're able to build it in and actually have a solutions focused, as well as understanding, you know, where the research challenges are in the space. We had some really interesting ones through one of our fellowships, which was working with businesses pre-pandemic about how do you support carers in the workplace. How timely was that research, really, in the sense that we all became, you know, at some level, some of us became quite heavy carers suddenly through the pandemic. And one of the elements that appear to that is actually how do you support the leadership and the decision making within the business within that space to enable that to happen. So I guess it's the earlier you're engaging with other organizations to understanding what their needs are, the more likely that research is applicable.
How easy is that to do at times?
Oh, well, that's it. I'd be interested to hear the other panelists who are in the thick of it. From myself as a funder, I have to think about what role that we play. And the key to anything is time to build relationships. And part of what we've been trying to do is before a call comes out, or is either pre-warn the community, but also working with universities to create seed funding to help create the relationships in the first place that will often take years to foster and develop. They might turn into other things, activities in the end, like a knowledge transfer partnership or other ways of funding something that from my lens. But it's about how do you create that time to foster relationships, to foster the trust, and to foster that community. Lola, go on, give us the other side, give us the other perspective.
In terms of fostering relationships, developing more knowledge exchange routes and communications, what we've been doing on the Recirculate projects because of COVID, in terms of our virtual engagement, we've got an active WhatsApp group comprising over 200 participants, which we use for knowledge exchange and communications. This has been good for us in developing trusts and sharing ideas, even on forthcoming calls, collaborating on calls. We've got another program which we call Participate, and it's a program of engagement activities specifically developed to stimulate discussion and collaboration across the networks we have in Africa, the UK, and elsewhere. And each month, what we do with the Participate program is we focus on a theme. And through events across a range of platforms, we can address challenges and opportunities in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And through this, we've been able to even build further networks and engage in newer ideas.
Yeah, I think one of the key points that's already beginning to come out of this, Richard, is that concept of time, whether it's building relationships, whether it's being able to juggle the many different functions that you guys have to perform. And in terms of that time aspect of what you're trying to do and the time you can give to engaged research, Richard, is it complicated as you move back to term now in terms of how teaching is going to work, the sort of uncertainty that the pandemic is creating?
Yeah, full on.
Yeah. Do you know if you're teaching or not?
I know I'm teaching.
But in person,
how
out of person?
And through what medium, I'm not quite sure yet. It'll be blended, Rahul. I know that. That's what it's going to be. No, I mean, Robert McIntosh made a really important point in terms of time in the chat. And, you know, I think just building on what Lola and Priscilla just said, remember that these kinds of really meaningful, engaged co-production researchers are about building relationship with external partners, which take time. You know, they're relationships of trust that take time. So there's this kind of balancing, as Robert says, about immediacy and patience, not only as the point that he makes, which is so true about really good quality evidence that's gathered over time to bear on problems, but also about developing relationships. But I wonder, Rahul, could I pick up a question that was made by Katie Mason and also by Jared Hodgkinson, which was really interesting questions in the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
If you look at Jared's question about how, as we get drawn more and more into, as Melanie said, into these sorts of mission-driven and collaborative, interdisciplinary sorts of, and transdisciplinary, in other words, working beyond the academy, relationships and ways of working. His question around how do we just make sure we don't just serve the government of the day or other very, very powerful, influential interests who perhaps have the purchasing power to say about what kinds of engaged research get done. And I'm kind of minded I was thinking about this before the session about two kind of forms of capture, if you like, that we need to, as management and social sciences, to be conscious of as we enter into this world. And I speak from experience here. And the first is what I would kind of describe as ontological capture. Sorry to use a big word, but you know, in other words, if we're entering into these sorts of relationships where we're adding value to something else that's led by, for example, scientists, not dissing scientists in any way, but you know, does that mean that and this is a question, that it's going to lend itself more to this sort of objectivist, positivist view at the expense of more constructivist, interpretivist type of research? I'm not saying that I know the answer to that, but it's just, is that the case? And I'm not actually giving any normative resonance to that either. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just asking the question about whether certain types of research will be privileged with certain kinds of philosophies over others. And of course, those of us that teach management research methods, because Rahul, you will understand that anyone in management has to teach management research methods at some point. We all know that the research philosophy you adopt depends on the questions that you're asking and how those questions are posed. So if we back up from that, we're sort of then saying, well, what kinds of questions are being asked in this kind of engaged research? And that speaks directly to Gerard's question. And then that leads me to the second form of capture, which is instrumental capture, which means, in other words, is the kind of engaged research that we might get invited into to add value to very instrumentally in its motivation. In other words, to smooth the transition of some sort of predefined policy objectives. Yeah,
Richard, just very quickly on that question that Jared raised there, do you, I mean, I'm sure that those factors, those pressures have always been there. Do you feel those pressures are more now than previously?
Well, reading the government's recent innovation strategy, I'd probably say yes. You know, I think I would argue that post-pandemic we're going to see more of the kind of white heat of science narrative that was beforehand as we try to claw back more revenues, and it's understandable that that's the case. But I think it means that certain people's careers could change as they enter into that space, because that's where the funding is, that's where the money is. There's more money in that area. And I'm wondering what that might mean for us as our identity as scholars and the kinds of research we do and the kinds of research questions we ask. That's all the point I'm making.
Priscilla, can I go to you on this? Because it is a very interesting point about, you know, where funding comes from and what comes with that funding in terms of expectations out there in the field in Africa. Does that worry you when you look at the direction of where that may be going, particularly here in the UK?
Well, it does. It's, in fact, the funding cuts in the UK affected the kind of work we're doing. So initially we made certain plans, but we couldn't go ahead because we had cuts in funding. But luckily for us, we were able to apply for certain other funding from other sources, and then we were able to do some of the things that we wanted to do. But again, from a developing country perspective, the challenge with doing engaged research basically is about funding, because the culture of engaging with target audiences is not in here at all. So before you promote that, you need to change mindsets within the academic community in the first place. And the first thing you are asked is, where do we get the money from? That's one big challenge that we are all facing. But gradually, we also think that it's an opportunity for us to change these mindsets that, look, for you to identify the sources, you need to be entrepreneurial in the first place. So which other way can I engage with consumers, considering the fact that funding is not coming in as I wished they were coming in? Okay, so these are some of the things they're doing. And I think it's good for me to just try and answer a question from Joanna Zuzimo about a program that we are doing currently. So we through our engagements, we've been able to co-create a project that we call SETS. You may recall I said that we always complain about funding in Africa. So we thought that let's change the mindset of our scientists to change the words, to reconsider how they go about searching for money. So we developed this project called Simulating Entrepreneurial Thinking Among Scientists. And this was co-produced with all the key strategic actors in the ecosystem. And we are proud to say that we were able to develop these toolkits to drive change in Africa with regard to how scientists behave. I think that that's a positive outcome of the Recirculate project.
Thank you for that, Priscilla. Melanie, I want to go. Robert's busy, Robert McIntosh, on the questions, and we do want them to all keep coming in. And he says, thanks for the answer, Richard. Isn't part of the answer to Jared's concern about being beholden to the government of the day to be working more directly with practice? In part, it disrupts the funding power that the government holds, and in part, it establishes credibility that management researchers know what industry needs. Is that an answer, Melanie, to some of the challenges? You are obviously on the other side, the funding side.
Yeah, I think it's too easy just to say government funding or one funding strand at all, or divert from one to another, because it's actually very complex, and funding, as Priscilla has just said, is available in different ways and different shapes. I do think there's an interesting discussion going on now about what the role of science and innovation is around supporting to solve big problems, net zero, leveling up that we were saying, but there's so, adult health and social care, mental health challenges, education, you can go on and on and on, and that's not just within the UK context. I think it's interesting in the sense of from our lens is we have our core funding still, so that money is still going into that kind of open science, or the open ideas, the kind of research that's sort of a bottom-up driven idea within that. And I think that links into your question, Robert, about time. Because hopefully when you're applying for funding, it's a bit clearer from the start about what you're choosing to apply to and what the needs of that are. So if you're applying for a knowledge exchange type award versus something where it's a consortia over 5 to 10 years, then your expectations are also set a little bit differently. I also think that if you're applying directly to a government funding department, that's very, very different than if you're applying to something like the research councils in this space, where hopefully we design the calls to be open and able to bring in the innovation lens. Like I don't think we try to presuppose the answer to it. What we're looking at, here's the problem, this is where we want to get to, what's that part of the journey? And that is absolutely critical on the research side of things. I think it's really important that we understand, I like Richard, how you say, are we either delivering the service of adoption of another discipline, or are we on ourselves in the leadership position? And I think we do play a little bit of both, but I think more and more the conversations I'm having is how do we move the social sciences into leading us to help us understand the problems, but also understand the solutions. So it's rather than an assistant to something, but be a true partnership where all lenses have the proper voice of what they're bringing into, not just helping solve an adoption challenge for a technology. And in fact, the technology may not even be the right answer in the first place. So I think there's a lot of onus on the funders to be designing the calls so they aren't just being there to answer question X from government, but actually be, as Katie, you've picked up, the wicked problems that we solve in a much larger context. And I think, as UKRI, we are also new to working together relatively in this space. And I really have seen in the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund where we've been able to leverage an additional £30 million for social sciences to be really at the forefront of some of these big sectoral challenges as an opportunity rather than a diversion.
But how you raise the issue of money, then getting extra money. How easy is that, Melanie? Because that's going to be fundamentally the key, isn't it? To have that pot of money to allow more engaged research to take place. And as we begin to come out of the pandemic and all the challenges that's posed to society, do you worry about the size of the pot being enough?
It's interesting. I like how Priscilla talks about being entrepreneurial. you know, and I think it is about understanding what's in your own institution, what's in your own local area, and really linking into the networks out there, that there's a lot of people whose jobs it are to understand what, you know, within the institutions about what the funding sources are. I mean, you ask a funder, are they ever worried about the size of the pot of funding? And of course, we always want more funding. You could ask the same of the BBC, you know, when you're reliant on these sorts of ways. I guess the question for us is, how do you make the most added value of what the funding is that you have, and how do you make that, and how do you make that work as hard as it possibly can to deliver the outcomes?
I want to go to Richard now there, because Professor Katie Mason, who's also very busy on the chat, which of course is on the right-hand side of your screen, says, I enjoyed Mel's point about the need to be part of society's solutions to complex and wicked problems. But what is Richard's take on this? I'm thinking of his comment on what does this change in the research funding landscape means for the way we act as scholars and researchers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually, I'm quite heartened by Melanie's comments here, because I think and anyone that works in development studies in any form will know what I'm about to say. And I don't claim to be a post-development scholar, by the way, but most of the issues that we face are, whether it's net zero or whatever, are social and political first and foremost. And the rush to the kind of techno fix, the scientific solution, I think that's got to change. At least a different option has to be considered before the call goes out, that whether or not we know. I'd love to see some of these things, Melanie, led by social scientists, because at the end of the day, we do have a huge contribution to make. And it's important that sometimes that we recognize that the rush to a sort of scientific solution, it might be and could be in many cases the right way to go, but sometimes might not be. And it has to be said, could cause greater problems than not. And we've seen that, and that's the history of science and technology in the past. So my take on it is that I would like to see more interdisciplinary consortia being led by social sciences as appropriate to the context of the question being asked and the problem being trying to address.
Lola, can I come to you on the point that Richard raised there about this, you know, desire for the scientific solution, desire for the techno fix? With your project, do you feel that pressure?
We do, yes, we do. And in terms of going beyond, if I can give example of what we've done on the back of the Recirculate project, for example, we've been able to launch a new project, which is Actuate, which is also working with 2 African communities to demonstrate that waste is energy. And this has been a funded project, which we got some funding from, given the transformational impact envisaged from the Recirculate project over the past few months. And this Actuate project is developing bioenergy systems in Ghana and Nigeria to deliver electricity, sanitation improvements, and sustainable fertilizer for crops. Essentially, it's trying to show that these bioenergy systems can use organic waste to produce biogas. So there are challenges to move beyond what we are doing presently with the Recirculate project, and we've been able to successfully get more funding for a new project, and we hope we could even get more for potentially new projects over the coming months.
Yeah, Priscilla, you've got praise from Joanna, who says, thank you, Priscilla. Recirculate is full of good practices of how to build relationships with funders rather than complain about the strategy that's taking place. Priscilla, in terms of that engaged research that you are doing at the moment out there, can I just ask you, in terms of the technology that we're seeing, I work for the BBC, we have completely changed the way that we work. We're able to access, if we take Afghanistan for an example recently, we're able to engage with a lot of people in Afghanistan through using technology in ways that we weren't able to do so before. Have you found that that's an advantage that's come out of the pandemic as well, in the way that you are able to use technology to help you with engaging with participants in your research?
I think that it's quite difficult to take advantage of that in a developing country context to an extent, because some communities don't have access to technology. Broadband is not available. So how do you communicate with this market woman who has no internet in the local market, local community? How do you engage with community leaders the way you need to? You have to even sometimes speak with them online. You have all this internet connectivity and all that as issues. So I think that has really, really affected us. But a plus is that we've been able to broaden our networks, okay, so that we don't really have local networks now. We have international networks. As Lola said, we have a participate with Recirculate platform, example. We've brought in a lot of people now so we have more people than we used to have. It's been a plus, it's been a minus, but I think that it's kind of stalled activities in terms of how we engage with the research users, basically the core communities, the local communities who are in the hinterlands and who are in the rural areas. That's become very difficult for us.
Do you think in a way then, as we look at engaged research in some parts of the world, it may become easier because of the technological changes that we've had, but in other parts of the world, maybe parts of Africa, parts of South Asia, parts of Latin America, where you have described those challenges, it's still going to be quite difficult?
Yeah, it is. I agree with you perfectly, Rahul. But I think that the core lesson from COVID is that there are lots of inequalities throughout the world. So we need to take steps to address these inequalities. Otherwise, we cannot engage effectively as we would want to. For example, we really need to make sure that the poorest in Africa have access to these basic amenities that we need to engage with. And again, if you go to these poor communities,
I think Priscilla has managed to mute herself there. We will come back to Priscilla.
Apologies.
Oh, no, there you go. Don't worry. That's the modern world of technology.
So I think that I was saying that COVID has given us, brought us a lesson on how there are so much inequalities in the world, so that you have some people having access to things that you need to engage with them, others don't really have. But I think moving forward, what we need to do is to ensure that the local person in the rural area has access to all these things. And again, that's what makes our work interesting in terms of trying to solve this water challenge. COVID is teaching us that most people don't have access to clean water in Africa, 50%, and that's going to become very difficult. So we need to work across disciplines. We need to partner. We need to make sure we engage more with all the key actors in the ecosystem to address all these grand challenges. And in fact, I listened to Peter Buckley's presentation on grand challenges yesterday at the BAM conference. I think he made some exciting, shared some exciting views on how we can address all these challenges through interdisciplinary partnerships with our local communities.
Melanie, can I come to you? Joanna Zazima says, do you have any more lessons on how researchers, entrepreneurs, and other stakeholders can go to you, visit, meet, engage, and work towards the same common goal, funded solutions, focused research?
So we have been working very much, I know not every institution has one, but we've got a number of institutions with impact acceleration accounts. And this is where we're allowing the university strategically to focus on how it supports things like scale up sustainability of impact and partnerships and co-creation. There's also a lot of other pots within the university that should be considered within those spaces, or at least a case be made through maybe through the higher education innovation funding HIFE that may be there to help build those relationships. I also think though one of the big lessons that I've had from working across a number of institutions is how some of the infrastructure areas, such as the tech transfer or the management, the knowledge exchange, business lens people, how unaware of what they are of actually what's going on within their own institution when it comes to researchers and research styles. So when businesses or other organizations or charities land on their doorstep, they tend to funnel them down through who they know, which is natural. That's what you do. And I guess I wonder, is there an opportunity to help those people who are the connectors, the real connectors in the university, to really see the opportunity from where the new connections can be made, and therefore think about how do you enable the sustainability within that space. I think it's a critical part of the ecosystem, is understanding and helping the you know, that sort of infrastructure in the university be aware of the breadth, especially under management and business studies, of where the potential is, and not just keep it within a departmental space.
Yeah, Richard, Melanie's point there, do you see that happening? Do you see that process taking place where you are, around you?
Yeah, to a degree. I think there's a question for me that we need to ask of people that lead and run management and business schools about their motivations for people being involved in engaged research and the value that they ascribe to it. It's very easy to use words like engagement and interdisciplinary. It's incredibly hard to do in practice. I'm not entirely sure that those of us that
Why
work
is it so
in
hard to do in practice?
Because it takes time to build relationships, because you have to work across different ways of seeing the world, you know, different ontologies. If you're working with a scientist or working with a business, you're trying to manage the trade-offs between your own interests and those of the partners that you're
As we see
involved
more
in.
of that, is it getting easier? Or are we not seeing enough of it?
Enough of
that engagement across different people that you're talking about there?
No,
that
I think there's
level
more.
of understanding.
There's definitely more aspiration for, you know, constantly there's a drive to work more with computer scientists and more with big external partners, particularly those that have lots of money, around these big challenges, for sure. But it is an incredibly difficult thing to do well, and because people speak different languages, and what external partners want and the timeframes in which they want them can be very different to us. So we're all learning about that process, about how to do that. And at the same time, there's a sort of, I'm not entirely sure that the value of that is truly appreciated sometimes within our discipline yet. And I think that that's something that needs to be raised. I think the profile of people that do engage research well and have time to do that probably needs to be raised.
Lola, let's go to somebody. Oh, go on, please, Melanie.
Yeah, no, Richard, I think your answer is really interesting from the inside perspective, you know, about what the drivers are and what the barriers are into doing this. And I think what's really important, I think, is we always talk about research impact, but actually it's researcher impact. Impact is about people and connections and what they're doing, and the research presents the platform and the evidence base for that. I think what we've seen, though, Rahul, as we look at this as over a long-term journey, say for 10 years now, is we have an incredibly keen new wave of researchers, doctoral training, PhD students, masters, who are actually really quite chomping at the bit to be starting to look at beyond just the methodological, but looking at the applications and the entrepreneurial or the real world solutions. It's really inspiring. We run the SRC Celebrating Impact Prize, and you know, the early career stage that comes through are just absolutely inspirational with where they see the opportunities to take their research there. So the key, I think, is, I would agree with Richard, it's self-motivation, but it's also the support structures that can either be an enabler or a barrier into doing that. If you're so pressured for time and you're not rewarded for it, then why would you do it in the first place?
Let's go to Lola and Priscilla here, because we are running out of time. It's been very lively. We've had lots of questions. There is still time to post on the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen if you would like to. Lola, I'll come to you first, and then Priscilla, if you could follow up quickly afterwards. There you are out there, both of you involved in engaged research. Just if you can quickly, just as you step back now and look at the work that you've done, what have been those challenges? What have you learned? What needs to change?
I've learned a lot in terms of engaged research. Engaged research has taught me that I should take a step back and look at what I do. Question myself in terms of what I want to get out of my research. So for me, what I've learned so far from being involved in the Recirculate project is that working with interdisciplinary groups can enable me to create transformational impact in society. And that, for me, defines engaged research. Engaged research is about working with different diverse communities. On the Recirculate group, for example, I work with scientists environmental scientists, engineers, biomedical and life sciences. And there's no way we could say we want to try to design, we want to co-create solutions to water problems in Africa by working in our own unique silos as entrepreneurship and innovation scholars. On the Recirculate project, we have 5 different work packages. Some focused on health and sanitation, some focused on food production, energy production, pathogens, and health. And without us all working collaboratively, it's impossible for a single discipline, entrepreneurship and innovation, to be able to do it alone. So I've learned a lot, but I think the challenge, the most significant challenge that I've encountered in terms of being involved in engaged research is that of time, as we've said.
Priscilla, on the other side there, you're obviously working very well with Lola at this particular point in time. As we begin to conclude this conversation, we're going to go to a question from Professor Martin Spring in a minute. Is it for you time that is the main main problem, the point that Richard really began this conversation with?
No, I don't teach. Fortunately, unfortunately, I'm a full-time researcher on the project, so that's what I've been employed to do. So I've not really experienced the time issue that they're talking about. But I think that in Africa, it's the bureaucratic inertia. It's very slow within institutions. Changing that mindset is something that has really been a hurdle to us because of, again, the financing bits will come in here, and you need to go through the process of teaching or promoting entrepreneurship within these institutions. That's been a bit. But I think that it's, what I've learned is giving strength to community voice, okay? Making sure that the use of my finding have a voice, or their voice comes out in my research. And then if I'm disseminating my findings, they also hear about the findings. So for example, I now write blogs. So you'll be surprised, I now write blogs. I never used to do that. So I feel that I've learned to write unacademically. Now I think that's really helped me. Being on the Recirculate project has been fantastic, honestly. Great,
but we're going to try and whiz through a couple of questions now in the last few minutes. I'm going to throw this one to Melanie firstly. Do we, as from Martin Spring, do we as business and management researchers need to improve our ability to present what we do, translate it for potential STEM collaborators and demonstrate its value? This seems an important part of interdisciplinary working with business researchers leading big projects. That is something that is there in every aspect of life. Melanie?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question and absolutely correct, I think, Martin. I think it's at the heart of leadership role in social science, which I think, lends itself to, do we see ourselves as actually leading to solve the problems? We constantly say we need to be in there, but are we part of that? And as a good leader, how do we communicate our added value? What additional thing can we bring? And in fact, it's not just researchers that needed to do that. In ESRC, when I was engaging newly across with Innovate UK, is I had to think about, how am I selling what social science can bring into these sectoral challenges? Rather than saying, what will we lose? I've been talking about what will we gain and what added value and what solutions can we help solve that you're already working towards, and how do we bring that value? But how do I communicate that more widely beyond my own community? I think is absolutely critical. And if we don't know our own value proposition, how can we sell our own value proposition to other people? And I think it's a really interesting area of the leadership role of social science. If we said there's an £80 million centre being there, social sciences should be absolutely putting themselves in as the directors of that. How do we respond in those situations? And where can we develop those skills to put ourselves within that place?
We got a final question from Robert McIntosh. I'm going to throw this one at you, Richard. For those running schools of business and management, part of the challenge is the career progression for those we manage are driven by one set of metrics. Financial sustainability are driven by another set of issues, and impact operates over a longer time frame. Mel makes a great point that we should write about research impact, and I think Robert and a load of others have written a book which argues that it is teams of researchers, not lone heroes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I've had the joy of running a business school in a previous role and seeing it from both sides of the table. And we've got to, you know, I think the point that Robert's making, well, one of the points that Robert's making here is that we cannot see engaged research outside of the context of the business models of universities and the contribution of business models of management schools and business schools and the financial contribution they make to universities. That is what is driving a lot of growth in this particular discipline. And there's a lot of discussion about that, which I'm not going to go into. But the point about that for me is, how does engaged research count in that schema? So if somebody you know, is involved in engaged research, yeah, if they're producing an impact case study, if they're producing some 4-star papers out of it, if they're producing research earnings for the department, that counts. But does the substance of meaning of engaged research in itself matter? Is what's really important. And I think that's what for me is where we've got to get to a situation where engagement as a means to an end for outputs that count towards the business model of the department within the broader context of the university and is less important than the meaning and substance of engaged research in terms of its contribution and value to society. And that's something that I think we're still a long way away from.
Yeah, Melanie, a long way away from is what Richard's saying, but from what you were saying before, particularly with that, you know, younger generations of researchers coming, where we began the journey, haven't we?
I believe so. I fully agree with Richard. We shouldn't be doing impact because it gets us a ref impact case study. We should be doing impact because it's publicly funded money and we need to solve real world problems and to the benefit of us all, including ourselves. I do think over 10 years, you know, the narrative have changed, that the drivers are starting to change, but, you know, there's institutional barriers that we still need to cover. There could be barriers that funders are putting up within their calls and approaches that we have as well. I think systems can often create unintended barriers to where we want real added value and solution. So I think it's, you know, I think it's a journey we are on. And I think you're absolutely right, Richard, as well. We need to understand what the good engaged researcher means as added value across a breadth of areas, not just to tick a box or to achieve a departmental aim. So yes, full of hope, opportunity, and to be honest, when you see the impact, Rahul, it is so inspiring when you actually see the real world difference, like the Recirculate project is you know, making on the ground, making between people, making within the networks. For me, that is about the most inspiring part of what my job can offer.
Lola, I'm going to ask you to be very quick here, but the key in a way, Lola, is your projects like yours, isn't it? The work that you're doing in changing people's lives, showing that engaged research works.
Absolutely, yes, we are showing in different ways that engaged research works. We are showing it does not just work for society, it works for academics as well. We show it in different ways, we communicate it in different ways. Priscilla mentioned some of the media outlets that are being used in Africa to show the impact, to show what we are doing. And if not for COVID, we would have had other events that we would have used in order to further show the impact of what we are doing.
Well, there we go. Well, as one of those media partners, I know you mentioned Forbes before, and others, we may have to get ourselves involved in that at some particular point in time. It really has been a fascinating discussion, as you could see from our panelists. They could have probably talked for a couple of more hours. Thank you to everyone who posted those questions on the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen. I hope we managed to get answers to most of them. It is a subject I'm sure that many of you are going to continue to talk about, continue to debate, look at some of those challenges, whether it's to do with funding, interdisciplinary work, the approach of finding solutions to the questions that are being answered. But that is the end of this particular session. Thanks to Melanie, thanks to Priscilla, thanks to Lola, thanks to Richard as well.